just in case,
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, if everyone is ready, then I'll go ahead and get started. So thank you all for coming. My name is Mason Laney, and I'm here to present a work, Human AI Collaboration in a Discussion Forum, a Toolsmith Approach to Research. So let's start by breaking down what this title actually means. So a student discussion forum is simply an online platform where students are able to ask questions about assignments or course content, and instructors will send them back a response. So there's things like Piazza, you send a question, instructor gives a response back. In most cases, this is just sort of like a sort of manual thing that the instructor does, fully human. And these discussion boards are very important. They provide a very valuable source of asynchronous interaction between students and instructors, and instructors can sort of formulate their responses in different types of feedback. So they could prompt the student to provide more details about their problem. They could sort of reduce the problem with a hint, basically turning the problem from something the student doesn't understand how to do, breaking it down into smaller steps they know how to solve the problem, or they could just send the solution directly. Now, human AI collaboration, on the other hand, is essentially just the idea of humans and AI agents working together towards some shared goal. The cool thing about this is that it can be mixed initiative, meaning that depending on the specific instance and the task, some things can be fully AI, some things can be fully human, some things can be sort of a mixture. And so, combining these ideas, it would turn this discussion forum diagram from this into something closer to this, where the feedback that the student receives from the instructor can have some degree of AI collaboration embedded in it. So it can still have this fully manual case like we normally had. This is basically just the instructor ignores the AI response, sends their response to the student directly like they normally would. But they can also just fully rely on the response that an AI agent gives to the student's question, or there can be some mixture where they edit a response given by an AI agent before sending it off to the student. Yes.
Per response or per question basis or?
Yes, this can be on a per question basis. Essentially, as we'll see, if an AI agent is able to, for example, like draft a response to a question, it is up to the instructor's discretion whether they want to send that response, get rid of it, edit it, etc. So it's a fully like per instance, per question basis, as it allows for a lot of flexibility. And that brings us to sort of our overall hypothesis, which is that it is possible to implement an instructor AI collaboration inside of a discussion forum that reduces instructor effort without reducing quality. So we present here a preliminary investigation of this hypothesis, starting with a description of this system. So this should tackle the first half of this hypothesis, basically whether it is possible to implement such a system for instructor AI collaboration. We will show here a user interface and then the architecture and algorithms behind it. And then we'll move on to the evaluation, a preliminary evaluation of whether such a system can actually reduce instructor effort without reducing quality like we hope here. So we show a field experience and then focus on a lab study. So let's start by looking at the user interface and sort of looking at our system from the outside. So this is an example of a question a student has posted on Piazza concerning some sort of null pointer exception they had in their toString method. They describe the problem that they're having. They include, a screenshot of some console output and some code. And one thing our toolkit is able to do, it is able to, as I alluded to before, draft a response using AI to the student's question. It does not send this response to the student directly. Instead, it sends it as a draft under the instructor's account. So whenever the instructor logs into Piazza to view this question, this response is already there waiting for them. If the instructor thinks that this response is good, they can send it out. If they want to make some changes, they can do that before sending it out. If they think the AI got it completely wrong, they can just Control-A delete it and respond as they normally would. An important thing to note here is that, as I talked about before, on a per instance basis, we can choose the degree of automation. We can choose, like I just said, whether it's fully all the way on the side of human, like I have that green dial over there. These dials represent basically the degree of AI automation, where green means all the way human, red means all the way AI, and yellow is sort of in the middle, some sort of editing. In addition to this, we also showcase the UI of some fully automated tools we have developed. So given this exact same question, if you notice, the student, when they are selecting the recipients for this post, they selected me. I was the TA for this course. And they didn't select any other instructors. So on Piazza, there's an instructor selection that we encourage students to use because that means the entire instructor team can view this question instead of just a single instructor. They failed to do that. They only just selected one instructor. And so our system automatically post a follow-up under this post that says, hey, it looks like you've posted this to individual instructors. Please edit your post, select instructors so the entire instructor team can handle this question. So this is something that previously we were doing sort of manually. We'd have to go and notice that, oh, this student accidentally posted this to only one instructor. That causes a headache in the workflow of the entire instructor team. Having this be done automatically can save a lot of time and effort. Another thing in a very similar manner that gets done automatically is there are certain tags that we want students to use if their post is to be private. So by default, we want to encourage students to post their questions publicly so that the entire course can benefit from the information and the sort of knowledge that comes with that post. But there are obviously certain situations, like if their post includes code, if it involves some sort of personal situation in which it is clear that we want this post to be private. In this case, the student posted this privately. They did not post it to the entire class, but they didn't include any of these tags that indicate that it should have been posted privately. So that's what this second part right here is saying. This is an automatic post or an automatic follow-up that is created by our tool saying, hey, you didn't include any of these tags. We think, if you actually think that your post should be private, please edit it to include some of these tags so that it matches up with how our system is supposed to work. And this student in this example, as I showed in the paper, actually does change their behavior, fix these issues that were brought up by this automated tool, and sort of continue that behavior moving forward. And then this sort of last automated tool that we present here in a very similar manner, we basically say, hey, it looks like you included a screenshot of code or a screenshot of a console trace. That's not super helpful for instructors. We want to be able to search through the actual text and find specific keywords. So it encourages them to replace the screenshot with the actual text they took a screenshot of. So now we've seen sort of a higher overview of what some of these tools look like. Let's look at the architecture and algorithms behind them. So this is the overall architecture of our system. So first, a scheduler essentially just fetches new posts, basically posts that have been made since the last time this tool has been ran, and sends it to our 4 tools. So this mediated GPT tool is the first one I showed, and that is the one that drafts the instructor response. The visibility checker and image checker tools I just went over. The office hours request checker tool I haven't covered in the paper because it's still sort of in progress, but there is a preliminary version. It's essentially very similar to those two, just sends out an automated response if an office hours request doesn't look like it contains enough information. So the scheduler, every so often, fetches a new batch of posts, sends these to these tools. These tools use the Piazza API and interface with the database, which I'll go over in a second. And these tools basically, use this information to enable the behavior that you've just seen. And in terms of this customizable post database, this handles all of the input and output of data to our system, and it does so using structured Piazza posts. So it does not require any sort of external database. All of the information used by our tool, which includes things like prompts, template posts, etc., all of this is handled automatically inside of Piazza. You don't have to have an external database. And also, if you want to edit any of this information or view any of this information, it's already there natively in the same Piazza course that you're already using. So there are different components of this customizable post database. The post directory essentially contains links to a bunch of information that the tool uses. So as an example, this mediated GPT tool that we saw, it has a prompt that uses to send a GPT. It has a log post that captures which posts have already been processed by our tool. All of this information is stored in Piazza, and if you want to go edit them, you essentially go to the post directory, follow the link, and then that will bring you to another Piazza post that you can then edit and sort of on the fly change things. So if we want to change the behavior of our system, all we have to do is go to the Piazza post containing, for example, a prompt or a template response, and we can edit that directly in Piazza. And sort of the default post, as we already, or the default prompt, excuse me, for mediated GPT, as we've seen, harkening back to the different ways of instructor responses, the different types, as I mentioned at the beginning, we want to sort of encourage students to solve the problem on their own. We don't want to give them the full solution. So we instruct them, basically give them step-by-step instructions with a hint that will hopefully reduce the problem into something they're able to solve. So here, one of the main points is that we are leveraging Piazza as a database to store all of our information that we can then customize and edit dynamically. Going a little bit more into the nitty-gritty in terms of some pseudocode algorithms. This is what our core execution loop, this is essentially what our scheduler in the previous diagram is doing. It is doing some authentication. It's determining which posts have yet to be processed by our tool. for each of these posts that have yet to be processed. It will send them to the different tools. And then finally, after they have been processed, it will add it directly to the log so that next time the tool is run, that tool or that post is not processed a second time. For our mediated GPT tool, this is sort of the algorithm for that at a very high level. We're basically given a single post. We want to figure out what assignment that post is talking about, fetch the information from that assignment, send the question that the student wrote and the instructions for that assignment, put that inside of our prompt that we send to GPT. We get a response back, and then we're able to draft that under the student's post. So going back now to our overall hypothesis, we have now shown essentially the first half of this hypothesis is true. We are able to demonstrate such a system, and we have described it here. Yes.
In the
Yes.
previous slide. So wouldn't you, this one. Wouldn't you want to do the order in reverse, like say invoke GPT or any such language model after the student has made everything set everything properly? Because say there's an image in the post,
Yes.
you would probably get a better response after the student has done something else.
Yes, absolutely. That's actually something we're looking at in the near future work, and something we're already thinking about is ways of changing this so that instead of just sending it directly to each tool individually, it sort of is a pipeline of different tools that, depending on the input or the output of the last tool, can change its behavior. So we would want to do something like that, like you just described, where essentially, if it contains an image, we say, hey, fix this first. If it, if an image is present, don't run the mediated GPT on this interaction. We want to run it once that student has fixed that issue. So yes, that is definitely something we're keeping in mind, as something we're looking to change and sort of build upon as we expand this out into more different tools.
And maybe the follow-up would be that nowadays these are probably good enough to handle some screenshots. How good are they at handling, say, images, especially, I mean, if you show them an abstract painting, maybe they don't work, but say if you're printing a list of these things in like a fairly darkish terminal, will they be confused? I'm not sure.
Not necessarily. Part of it depends on, like, students oftentimes take multiple screenshots of one console output that has some like overlap and stuff like that. They can potentially confuse it because it's oftentimes not just like one clean screenshot of the particular thing. But as these models get more advanced, it potentially can look at that and then synthesize that back into a single post or like a single, I guess, item of text, and that is potentially also very useful.
Also, the response may not be given by AI, right? It may be given by the human being.
Yes, that's also true. Yeah, at each step of this process, like especially for the mediated GPT tool, we still have that level of flexibility. So in certain cases, like if the student hasn't fixed the issue yet, but an instructor gets to it before it's been fixed, then we can still provide the answer manually like we normally would. Cool. So yeah, like I was saying, we have now sort of demonstrated the implementation of this tool kit, and we want to sort of now look at the evaluation and sort of the ideas behind how we would evaluate such a tool. So we have developed a few different evaluation hypotheses. The first three are sort of tackling these three different degrees of automation, as I mentioned before, where we want to look at, is it possible to categorize situations where fully automatic responses are most useful, regardless of how long the system takes to run? Second hypothesis, is it possible to categorize situations where semi-automatic responses are the most useful, regardless of the response time? And third, is it possible to categorize situations where fully manual responses are most useful? We also have sort of another hypothesis building on fully automatic and semi-automatic versions, which again, these sort of require the tool to run. And our hypothesis is that it is possible to categorize how populated a form can be in order to provide such a tool with these semi-automatic and automated responses in a synchronous exercise. So a lot of times course forms are used asynchronously, but they can also be used for synchronous exercises. And for a synchronous exercise, there may be some delay in response time that it takes as it processes everything. We're saying here that we can categorize how populated a form can be for the semi-automated and automated responses to not particularly work for that case. The second hypothesis with the semi-automated responses is the main one that I will be looking at here for this evaluation. So taking this and building off of it, we have a few different sub-hypotheses here. So first, we may say that, or we may hypothesize that humans may be initially a little bit overly trusting of the automated responses. They may just think, hey, the system has already done this work for me. It looks good. I'm going to go ahead and send it. But after seeing the automated system make a glaring error, the humans may be a little bit more careful and take some more time as they're entering responses. They may be a little bit more wary of how this is going to go. And finally, again, when we're looking at this particular type of instructor response where we're trying to reduce the problem by giving a hint, we hypothesize that humans may have a tendency to just give out the first hint, sort of the easiest thing. They say, oh, this student is struggling with this sort of thing. I'm just going to send out this hint. And instead of analyzing which hint is more relevant, because that takes a little bit more effort. And hopefully our automated system is able to do this and potentially do it even in cases where humans may just be a little bit lazy and just send out the first hint. So there are 3 different evaluation techniques we have come up with for how to evaluate such a system. The first is a field study, which is essentially just using the toolkit on an active computer science course discussion forum. This is currently in progress and has been happening. We have deployed this tool to the current offering of Comp 524. The example you saw earlier was directly from that course. Second, we conduct a lab study where we perform a controlled experiment to assess the utility of a tool. This is conducted in conjunction with a course project for Comp 790, Special Topics, and HCI. And finally, a retrospective study is possible where we essentially have gathered past questions and manual answers from Comp 524, and we can potentially look at how well the tool could have answered these questions had it been available to the instructors. But the one we're going to focus on for now is this lab study, basically performing controlled experiments to assess the utility of a tool. So for the study, it's actually conducted in 2 different phases. And this in particular, we're looking at it for synchronous programming exercises. Like I said, we've already deployed this to Comp 524 for an asynchronous sort of general course experience. We want to see how well it can do specifically for a synchronous exercise. Phase 1 of the study, we evaluate this tool from the student perspective, essentially just I'll go into it in a second, but students complete an exercise, post their questions to Piazza. I'm there monitoring it. The tool is used. They get their responses back. Our goal here is just to test this idea of using it for synchronous deployment while also collecting data we can use in the second phase. And the second phase is evaluating this tool from the instructor perspective. We essentially want to determine the quality of the responses generated by this mediated GPT tool. And for the study, we created a flyer, we got IRB approval and recruited participants. As compensation, they received $15 per phase. This first phase is essentially they have to complete a 1-hour Java programming exercise about concurrency, and they're encouraged to post questions to Piazza if they're confused at all. And students for this exercise had access to a tool that would generate a Piazza post template containing information about their problem. So basically, they don't even have to go through the effort of making an entire Piazza post from scratch. They just copy and paste this template into Piazza, fill out a couple of sections about their problem description and their hint, and their code, their unit test results, their console trace, all of that is already in the prompt that they can just copy and paste directly into Piazza. You can see here an example from this phase 1 study of a question the student posted where they filled in. You can see at the top, they say, I can't figure out where to start with fair thread remainder size. I know the issue is because it puts all the work, blah, 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 blah. They have not received any previous hints on this exercise. And then it contains, their relevant test messages, the relevant code, etc. For this exercise, again, we're trying to test our mediated GPT tool. We use a custom prompt, different from our normal prompts, which again, we can sort of customize these prompts on the fly because they're directly in Piazza Post. We use a custom prompt that instructs the mediated GPT tool to give students hints from a predefined list. So instead of just having the AI agent answer it in a free-form manner, it has access to a predefined list of hints, basically saying, hey, if a student is running into this error, you should tell them this. If you've already told them this, you should tell them this, etc. And you can see here down at the bottom an example of the response generated by our tool, where it has picked out a specific hint from this list and says, hey, tells the student, hey, look at the console output indicating how much, blah, 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 blah. And so the instructor is able to look over this and say, hey, it did a good job. It correctly identified the hint that should be given to the student. I can send it. Or if there's some issues with it, the instructor is able to edit this. For phase 1, we recruited 4 participants, which totaled 8 total Piazza posts through this 1-hour programming exercise. This exercise was also administered to Comp 524, and after sort of coming through all of the different questions and pulling out ones that were unique, we were left with 14 different posts we used for phase 2 of the study. On average, for the synchronous exercise, it took students about 2 to 3 minutes to receive a response from me. But this is heavily dependent on how populated the Piazza course is. So going back to our hypothesis of basically saying how populated a Piazza course is will affect how well it can work with synchronous exercises, because in the current implementation, which is due to a limitation in the way the Piazza API works, the more posts there are in a course, the longer it takes the tool to run. So for this synchronous exercise on a fresh course, it took about 2 to 3 minutes, including the tool running and then me looking over and confirming the responses were good. For phase 2, participants were given questions, anonymized questions from this first phase, and they had to respond to them. You can see here, basically they were given this exact sort of text from these Piazza posts I just showed, and they had to develop their response as if they were an instructor. For the first half of these questions, so for the first 7 questions, they are under this manual condition where they only have access to the Piazza posts and then the hints. But for the second phase, they also have access to the response generated by the mediated GPT tool. So basically the first half, we're simulating the sort of normal manual condition. The second half, we're simulating this sort of human AI collaboration condition where they have access to this response. If they like it, again, they can work on it. If not, they can just completely ignore it. So again, you can see here sort of instances of these students working through these participants working through phase 2, where they're able to basically write, look at all the hints, look at the Piazza post, and are able to draft a response for what they would have told the student if they were an instructor. And this study is still ongoing. We have currently recruited 3 participants. But we are hoping to get a couple more in the next few days. This is, like I said, an ongoing study where we're still trying to get more and more information about the quality of these responses. So far, we've gotten, 7 items per condition times 3 students is 21 manual responses and 21 semi-automated responses to these questions. Some evaluation metrics that make sense for this sort of study is the number of edits made to these automated responses. We basically want to see how much do students typically have to edit the responses versus just sending them or deleting them. The number of mistakes people make in their responses. So like how often do students give the wrong hint in the manual condition? How often do students give the wrong hint in the semi-automated condition? And also just subjective opinions of the use of this study. So for both phases, we sent out surveys to receive sort of subjective opinions of use. So far, in terms of preliminary results, we have found instances where the response given by the tool was essentially perfect. It could be sent out immediately. Again, this is our fully automatic condition where the instructor looks at this, says, okay, this is good, sweet. So this confirms our hypothesis that, we can categorize these sorts of instances in which automated responses are good. We have also seen the flip side where the response generated by the AI is just completely wrong and should just be thrown out altogether. So in this case, this is a student posted this question saying, I have race conditions that still exist on this method, and the GPT agent gives completely the wrong hint. It gives a hint for the wrong problem altogether. So this is an example of a fully mediated or fully manual condition where the human should take over and sort of ignore what the AI was doing. And again, the nice thing is we have the flexibility to do this very easily directly in Piazza. Then that leaves us with the situation that are in between. And we have also, through phase 2, found instances where some edits were necessary, but the response was still helpful. So this is a screenshot directly from one of the videos I was showing earlier of phase 2, where on the top is the LLM generated draft that was created by our mediated GPT tool. On the bottom is what the participant in phase 2 actually ended up saying was their final answer. And the highlighted portions are the portions that differ. So they ended up changing the hint from what the LLM generated draft was, and they ended up changing a little bit of the text, but a lot of the explanation for why they were giving this sort of hint ended up remaining the same. And that's because this is, I believe, a later hint from the same set of hints for the same problem. So it correctly identified the problem and gave an explanation of how to, broadly speaking, fix it. But the immediate feedback, the student decides to give sort of a later on piece of feedback. And these three examples sort of demonstrate the different degrees of automation, but also why an automated system or why a mediated system is useful. Because going back, if we just had an automatic system, this would be good, and this would be very bad because it obviously just gave the wrong answer. But if we had a fully manual system, then the instructor would spend a lot of excess time writing this answer when this could have just been handled by a tool like this altogether. And again, there are some cases where we will have some sort of mixture. We want to have some sort of collaboration between the human and the AI agent. We sort of get the best of all worlds here, because in situations where we can take advantage of the GPT's power, we can defer to that. In situations where we need to take over, we have the flexibility to do that fully on our own. In terms of some related pieces of work, a few of the most relevant ones are Jill Watson, AITA, and Boiler TAI. All of these works investigate the use of large language models to automate discussion forums. All three of these works were published after a demo paper I gave at IUI, and they demonstrate that this is an important sort of an active research direction. So this general idea is useful and good, and we want to continue sort of looking at ways to expand course forums and integrate mediation into them. But there are also aspects of our work that are unique. First of all, the use of these fully automated tools. So those other related works are basically just looking at the question of, some sort of mediation for a single answer, or it's just some like very basic canned responses. We have the flexibility to have these particular fully automated tools and expand further. We have the unique contribution of leveraging the discussion forum as a database. The other tools require some sort of external knowledge source and database that they cannot be edited directly natively in Piazza like we can here. We have the unique contribution of this lab study and a planned retrospective study that we already have the data for. All of those other ones just sort of looked at field studies. We have, some contributions in terms of our prompt engineering for the different aspects of our tool, in terms of characterizing different problems for which automation is useful versus situations where they would not be useful. We've looked at, Prolog, SML, Java, different languages from 524. We have characterized also different types of feedback and how those incorporate into the different levels of automation. So some takeaways for this work. We have shown here a toolsmith approach to research, where we conduct a mostly breadth-first search of research issues in tool design, implementation, and evaluation. These results, again, are still very preliminary. The point is just to demonstrate the directions we are going in, and there's a lot of ground to cover still, but I think there was a lot of very interesting research directions here. And I think this has the potential to be a very revolutionary tool to sort of change the system forums, make them as effective as possible for both the instructors and the students. And again, it's very flexible. We can support synchronous exercises or asynchronous exercises. We can support hints or just fully free-form responses. And again, we have this degree of automated, mediated, or manual. And again, it raises a rich set of research issues and questions and solutions. Finally, I will not read this all, but I'll leave you all with this sort of takeaways about me as a research student and different aspects that I feel that I have demonstrated in this work between creativity, integration of concepts, research acumen, writing, presentation. Some sort of main things to point out, sort of the synthesis of all these different tools together, the conducting of the research study from the full pipeline of figuring out a research question, evaluating it, recruiting participants, conducting studies. Again, this IUI demo paper I've referred to is a demo paper on this mediated GPT tool. That was sort of the synthesis of all of this that we have since expanded on. And then also I presented a work at Climate NLP 2024 to demonstrate my presentation skills and writing skills. It was a workshop of ACL. So that is essentially all I have prepared for in terms of the actual talk itself. Do you all have any questions? I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I have a few questions. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what you have is fantastic in the sense that you have done a very nice foundation in terms of capturing a very widely used discussion forum and address an important topic, which is probably a biggest thing on instructor's time and also TA's time. I want to know what would be again, there are, at least from my experience, there are like two different types of publications in the education space. One is some sort of fundamental methodology / philosophy type papers where you just explain a specific concept and like explain different facets of it. And the other are sort of quantified things where, oh, there are like 20 people are in this course and they did this. Of course, in CS courses, maybe the numbers can be large. What direction do you see your work going on in future? I think I see both of them widely open, but which one would you want to push further?
That's a very interesting question. I think you're right in that both directions are sort of open. I guess first there are a few different things I would like to wrap up on the implementation of just building out some functionality to demonstrate that this particular iteration of this tool is useful. But I do think after that is completed, I think looking further into sort of discussion board agnostic, so things besides Piazza, and sort of building out these principles for how to use this in a broader sense, I think is a very useful direction of study. And I think, like I mentioned, there's some other work sort of looking at very particular implementations of systems they've built, but I don't think there are a lot of other works that have sort of demonstrated this larger sort of idea of how all this connects and sort of from a more principled manner. So like, yeah, I guess my answer to that would be, I think in the short term, finish all these different implementation things I want to build to get this to things so it's most useful for me and other people who use it on Piazza right now. But in a longer term sense, I do think I want to build out some of those more, I guess, theoretical ideas of it.
And maybe continuing on specifically the evaluation of this. So I'm not too well versed with the amount of quantification that is required for, say, a standard publication in this domain. But do you think you have enough data to actually have some sort of a hypothesis being validated/invalidated at this? Because you have 4 participants in one and 3 participants in another, roughly 20 to 25 posts. What do you think? And then how much more data do you think you need to wrap up this lab 1 and lab 2, and maybe send it as like a full-fledged paper on its own?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would like to get a few more participants. Like I said, we still have some more for phase 2 that are hopefully coming in, but even for phase 1, I would like to get a few more. It was hard to recruit people towards the back half of the semester because they were busy with various things. But I think starting this up again, like all of this stuff is ready and can be conducted a second time at the beginning of next semester. I think getting that closer into like the 8 to 12 range for both of them, I think would sort of give a sort of wider degree of diversity in the students to make sure that that's representative. And I think at that point, it would definitely be worthy or like valid in some sort of research sense for publication.
Nice.
Actually, if I can elaborate, Laney, I know you know better, but this stuff goes in software engineering conferences also, by the way.
I see.
And a safe number is 20.
Oh, 20 participants?
That's a very safe number.
Oh,
But I've seen papers with 10 participants.
okay.
And when I was at Microsoft, when we guys did studies, Microsoft managed to bribe people into doing things.
Yeah.
But we didn't get more than 20 participants.
Nice.
So this can go to user interface conferences. There's a conference called IUI that he talked about. This can go to software engineering conferences. And the education conferences, a little less so because this is sort of a new tool rather than a new methodology. We're not changing the way people teach.
Oh,
Presumably the instructor feedback should be the same.
yeah.
So it's really an automation machine. Sorry?
I feel like I could see 6C being somewhat interested.
Oh, 60, yes, 60. I've published 60 tool papers.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
60 will be the most receptive in terms of impact.
Yeah.
So this is an amazing project. I'm sure it's useful for a lot of people. Are you planning to like turn it into a company? Is sort of my fun. My real question is, I'm curious about the implementation. Like, what were you sitting down to do, and like which parts did you enjoy the most or were the most challenging?
Yeah, a lot of implementation was down to determining how the Piazza API worked. There's no documentation for it. It's not like an official thing they provide as much as a thing that if you go into network tools in Chrome, you can see the API responses and mimic them. So there are some weird quirks in how all of that worked. So there was a fair bit of time just figuring out how, how all of that fit together. I think the part I most enjoyed was just, once all that had been figured out, just getting it to a place where I actually could use it in the course I was TAing for, and like seeing the moment I sort of alluded to earlier, where a student had those issues in terms of like their visibility was wrong and they posted to only me instead of the entire instructor team, and those automated tools were run, and the student actually like marked them as resolved, edited them, changed it there, and then the next time they posted, they actually had all of those things fixed. And so that was the moment where I was like, oh, actually, this tool is like currently changing the behavior of students in a positive way, and sort of seeing all that come together, I think was probably the most enjoyable part of working on it, is like towards the latter half, once you're actually like seeing the impact, seeing like the basically just the potential for these tools, I thought was very enjoyable.
So again, elaborate on that. Ethan, the person we just offered the CAP position to, was a whiz actually at implementation. He said he had thought of such a tool. He tried the Piazza and he gave up.
Oh, okay.
That's, I mean, it's.
And
very
he's a whiz,
impressive.
you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So this was.
So I guess one of the questions to take you way back towards the beginning of the talk, kind of building on your question, where are things going from here? And when you're talking about HCAI, you're really talking about a cycle. It's even visualized as such, right? You have the AI giving feedback to the instructor providing feedback. And what you have here is very kind of a unilateral, a single direction of the cycle that's being executed. How would you think about adjusting the tool and the approaches taken here to reflect more of that true cyclic feedback?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, something that, so there's one direction we want to work on in future work, which is essentially just handling follow-up posts to things better, so that it can be more of a discussion back and forth, as opposed to just like a single instance of a question. I also think there could be potentially some interest in something that, given a student's post, sort of summarizes it for the instructor or points out where a potential issue could be, which this already sort of does in a roundabout way, but or not a roundabout way, because it answers it for the student, hopefully. But I think some aspects of tool that could just more directly be like specifically targeted at the instructor, not at the student, I think could be implemented. And I think the combination of those two things could lead to a very, very valuable sort of like cyclical nature of like, encouraging these sort of interactions in the most effective way possible, so that, you don't waste time having to go back and look at a Piazza post and be like, what was this particular student's issue? And then all of that sort of stuff. I think that, there's a lot of potential there.
Would this tool have helped you yesterday?
Yes,
Yesterday was the last deadline, the last.
very much so. Yeah, the last 2 days I'm teeing for 524 right now, and there's been a lot
Last
of
year finished on projects.
questions.
I was getting message at 11 o'clock. And it was 11:59, and the student says, "Can you meet with me right now to tell me how to fix my code?"
What?
Yes.
Yeah.
At 11 o'clock, she asked me.
Yeah.
And I was dealing with two different students at the same time at that time. I said, "I'm going to sleep, guys. I'm not looking at it first."
Yeah, your tool is definitely needed then.
But it's not clear, guys, that this is going to work out. I mean, this is a very structured exercise he gave. Where the hints were all predefined. I mean, unstructured, who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I guess sort of building off that, the something I also want to look at in future work is RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which is the idea of you have a database of like just a database of information is right, and you can basically search in that database and pull out the most relevant bits of information to feed to the model. We're kind of doing that in the sense that like we are giving the assignment instructions to the model, but I do think that we could incorporate some other course materials, PowerPoints, all the other sort of learning materials from the course. And if the model was able to sort of look through that and pull out the most relevant pieces, I think that could help it sort of tackle those more free-form questions that aren't sort of handled as nicely in this very like particular hint-based thing.
One question I have. So typically the response is by some sort of language model are bit too verbose.
Yes.
And what happens is that when anyone is reading some sort of verbose text, they tend to spend more time with the material. And maybe just the act of thinking about it for a few more seconds
Mm.
might make them feel like, oh, okay, this is actually a much better response, and especially given that the responses by these are not language dense, in the sense
Mhm.
that if I'm giving a hint, it's very hard for me to kind of do a lot of these boilerplate things and then give a hint in a diluted form. Whereas for some reason I can trust large language model
Mm.
to say, okay, this is the hint, and the hint is just like one sentence or something, and maybe you generate like one or two paragraphs kind of explaining the context, and maybe the student, oh, okay, now I get it. So how do you even deal with that questioning in this evaluation, especially?
That's a good point. Yeah, currently for like the phase 1 and phase 2 evaluation, the model is instructed to not provide any information to the student apart from what's in the hint. But it does to some degree kind of reiterate some of like, or reword some of it in addition. Like it'll give it like word for word, and then also, like you say, it has a tendency to want to explain things.
Yeah.
So even if it gives that exact hint, it'll also say something before or after it, saying like, here's what this is trying to do. Here's what it's trying to get you to understand. And yeah, that's not like explicitly controlled for anything we're looking at. But when I go through and sort of like look at these responses in more fine-grained detail, I do sort of want to look and see like how much additional information did it actually give? Because I do think some of that, like you were saying, could be useful. Just like rewording something, reiterating something, or like adding a little bit of contextual information could help a student, I think, potentially either think through the problem a little bit more, or just like have a better understanding of what the hit's actually trying to
Yeah,
get
or
across.
just writing the question once more, and the student just, oh, okay, there is something important here, let me go through. And
Yeah.
and when they actually read it carefully, I mean, there have been studies where they said like making the font worse or changing the format of a flyer suddenly improved understanding. Why? Because students are actually now paying attention because it's hard to read. So
That's interesting. Yeah, and I think something that's very important is like reducing the not the barrier to entry, but like reducing the effort required for students to post to Piazza and make questions like this. The tool that we use in this phase 1 here is like, I think helpful, because all the student has to do is like, here's the problem I had, the code, everything else is already explained there. So then GPT has the information it needs. But then also there's, yeah, very low effort required on behalf of the student to actually post that question. But even just that little bit of split second thinking like, okay, I have to describe what my issue is. I think a lot of the time that is enough in a lot of cases to actually like have them sort of reach that light bulb moment of like, oh, that's actually, I've solved it myself a lot of times, I think can happen. But yeah, I think making it, both making it as efficient as possible for the instructors to respond to posts, but also as efficient as possible for students to like go through, receive help, not have to feel like it's a very big deal that they're demanding a lot of instructors of anything like that. I think it's very important.
Yeah, if you can just add that there's integration of the programming environment and testing framework.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the Piazza tool working alone. And in the testing framework, there's a programming environment that's capturing things, and that's all being combined together.
Yeah.
And so it's a symphony. Sorry.
But to your point, right, one term for what you're describing, I think, is something called design friction, right? If you make things a little more difficult to use, people actually have to think about what they're doing and therefore use it.
Yeah.
What makes it to what you raised about you're kind of slowing the student down, but you're accelerating the process for the instructor. I'm curious on the other side as well. You mentioned the idea of automation over reliance, right?
Mhm.
As you reduce that load on the instructor, you might also have a tendency to introduce that over reliance, like the tool gets it right a lot, people are thinking about it less, or the alternative is there's so much stuff there that the instructor just kind of skims and they miss the things that might be wrong, or maybe like there's a little bit of anchoring bias, and so they assume that the tool is moving in the right direction, maybe they're tweaking when maybe the real answer is something way over here that since they have the suggestion in front of them, they're not thinking about at this point. So I'm curious if in the evaluations you've seen so far, you've seen evidence of these kinds of biases, and if so, or if you think it's a possibility that it might occur, and then how you might think about tackling that in the design of the system itself.
Yeah. So when I was in phase 1, when I was acting as the instructor, there actually was an instance where I okayed a response that was wrong, and I caught it like a minute later when I was looking at it after I'd posted, where I was because I was running it synchronously for the first time, I was used to using this tool asynchronously, that I like felt pressure to get it to the student right away. And in doing so, I sort of skimmed through. It was like, that looks good. And then I realized a minute later, like, wait a minute, no, it's not. And that was after, you know, it had gotten it right a few times, like you were saying. So I think that bias is definitely prevalent potentially. Or not prevalent, but it could be there. Yeah, and I think it's towards that point, I think it's important to hone in on the right level of automation. Because yeah, there's sort of bad things at both ends, and trying to figure out, like, for a specific task or for specific instance, what is the right one, I think is important. Yeah, that's I think something we need to look into more in terms of how do we ensure that that happens, especially on the instructor side. Yeah, because a lot of times it's like, oh, this tool is like doing my job so much faster, even if reading over it would take less time than before if the tool didn't exist. I think people still may have the temptation to just like, yeah, overly rely on it. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, and that people need to keep in mind as they're using it. In terms of like, yeah, how exactly to accomplish that, I think that, yeah, that's an interesting question in terms of, I think we'll look into that more in terms of, yeah, you don't want to introduce too much friction, but yeah, you can't have that reliance on it.
That has to be a 3 o'clock.
Hmm.
By the way, the term is homeostasis,
Okay.
where as seatbelts got introduced, the accident rates did not go down because people were speeding more. So as the tool starts doing things for you, and you start being more risky and saying, okay.
And the talk was actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, I saw the talk already.
Thank you.
Sorry?
Is that a submitted, that's a published paper?
No, I wrote that just for.
Oh.
He wrote his paper, so this is where you guys have to catch. He wrote I've not seen his paper.
Oh, really?
He spent the whole one night and wrote the whole paper.
2 nights. 2 nights.
2 nights. It was.
Thank you.
I haven't seen a word of it. I was too scared to see it. I said, and the talk was done after yesterday. I think he spent 3 hours.
Mhm.
You did spend 3 hours
Yeah,
last night?
feeling great.
I said, show me the talk. He said, I'm still finishing it up. So he just, at 1:30, he finished it.
I like things to be very polished.
He's a
I don't know.
deadline-driven person.
Yeah.
I'm not. You say I've never had an overnight throughout my undergrad back teaching. Sorry, I haven't had kids.
If I
Yeah.
can make one suggestion on
Yes.
the rhetorical front, when you're thinking about your hypotheses, or a lot of your hypotheses are of the form, it is possible to.
Mhm.
That's really hard to falsify.
Yeah.
And it's also
Fair.
really hard to design for and like have a statistical threshold for.
Mm.
So if you start thinking about your hypotheses as like, this is the thing that I will then design the experiment to test, and I will run the evaluations, like especially the statistical evaluations to see, right? Is it possible if you get like one positive result out of 100, you could say, yeah, I guess technically it is possible.
Yeah, I think
right?
to what degree is a better thing.
To what degree, or even some sort of comparison.
Mm.
So I think when you broke down hypothesis Q into A, B, and C, you started to have some more comparative phrases.
Yes.
Depending on where you're submitting things, I know some of the viewers get really particular about this, but it's also helpful just for thinking about the design and the evaluation of your studies. But just a minor rhetorical comment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind.
Guys, I'll let you guys talk on yourself.
Ready, stop recording.